What would you do if saving someone's life cost you everything? If doing the right thing destroyed your future, would you still make the same choice? Darius Washington thought he was just helping a scared kid hiding in a parking garage at 2 a.m. The 8-year-old boy was covered in bruises, burns from cigarettes, and terror that no child should ever experience. Most people would have called the police and walked away. But Darius did something different. Something that would change both their lives forever. For his act of kindness, Darius paid the ultimate price. False accusations destroyed his reputation. Job after job slipped through his fingers. 20 years of struggle followed. Sleeping on mattresses on the floor, working multiple dead-end jobs just to survive, watching his dreams crumble while the world seemed determined to punish him for doing what was right. But here's what Darius didn't know. That terrified little boy he saved? He never forgot. And 20 years later, when a mysterious man in an expensive suit pulls up to Darius's rundown apartment building, everything is about to change. Some people say karma doesn't exist. That good deeds go unrewarded while bad people prosper. They're about to be proven wrong in the most spectacular way possible. This is the story of how one night of courage created a chain reaction that took 2 decades to complete. How the universe kept perfect records of every sacrifice, every injustice, and every act of love. And how sometimes, when you least expect it, karma arrives with interest that will leave you speechless. The clock read 2:17 a.m. when Darius Washington heard the soft whimpering echoing through the parking garage. Most security guards would have ignored it, assuming it was just another stray cat or the wind playing tricks. But Darius had learned to trust his instincts during his 3 years working the night shift at the Meridian office complex. He grabbed his flashlight and followed the sound, his footsteps echoing against the concrete walls. What he found made his blood run cold. Huddled between 2 cars, shivering in nothing but torn pajamas, was a small boy. The child couldn't have been older than 8, and even in the dim light, Darius could see the dark bruises covering his thin arms. "Hey there, little man," Darius whispered, crouching down slowly. "What are you doing out here?" The boy looked up with eyes that held far too much fear for someone so young. His face was streaked with tears, and there was a fresh cut above his left eyebrow. When he tried to speak, his voice came out as barely a whisper. "I can't go home. He said he'd kill me if I came back tonight." Darius felt his heart sink. He had seen enough in his 34 years to recognize the signs. This wasn't just a kid who had wandered off. This was a child running for his life. "What's your name, son?" "Tommy. Tommy Fletcher." The boy's voice shook as he spoke. "I live in the apartments across the street. Building C." Darius knew those apartments well. They were part of the low-income housing complex that had seen better days. The kind of place where people minded their own business, even when they shouldn't. "Tommy, I'm Darius. I work security here, and I want to help you. Can you tell me what happened?" The boy's small body trembled as he tried to form the words. Vincent was drinking again. He gets really angry when he drinks. Mom was at work, and he started yelling at me about the dishes. I tried to clean them, but I dropped a glass. Tommy pulled up his pajama shirt, revealing circular burns scattered across his chest and stomach. Cigarette burns. Fresh ones. He locked me out and said if I came back before morning, he'd make it worse. But it's so cold, and I didn't know where to go. Darius had to fight back the rage building in his chest. He had grown up in foster care himself, bouncing from home to home until he aged out of the system at 18. He knew what it felt like to be powerless, to be at the mercy of adults who were supposed to protect you. "Tommy, listen to me carefully. You're safe now, okay? Vincent isn't going to hurt you anymore." The boy looked at him with a mixture of hope and disbelief. "But he said if I ever told anyone, he'd hurt my mom too." "Your mom doesn't know about this, does she?" Tommy shook his head. "She works 2 jobs. She's always tired when she comes home. Vincent acts nice when she's around." Darius stood up and extended his hand. "Come with me, Tommy. Let's get you somewhere warm." For a moment, the boy hesitated. Then, slowly, he reached out and took Darius's hand. His small fingers were ice cold. Darius led Tommy to his security office first, where he kept a first aid kit. He cleaned the cut on the boy's forehead and gently applied antiseptic to the cigarette burns. Tommy winced but didn't cry out. The kid had learned not to make noise when he was in pain. "Tommy, I'm going to take you to my apartment. It's just a few blocks away. You can get some sleep, and in the morning, we're going to figure out how to make sure Vincent never hurts you again." The boy's eyes widened. "You're not going to take me back there?" "Not until we make sure you're safe." I promise you that. Darius called his supervisor and explained he had a family emergency. Then he wrapped Tommy in his security jacket and walked him to his beat-up Honda Civic. The drive to his apartment was quiet, but Darius could feel the tension slowly leaving the boy's small frame. Darius's apartment wasn't much. A one-bedroom place in a building that had seen better days, but it was clean and warm. He gave Tommy a pair of his old sweatpants and a t-shirt that hung like a dress on the child's thin frame. Are you hungry? Tommy nodded eagerly. When was the last time this kid had eaten a proper meal? Darius made scrambled eggs and toast, watching as Tommy devoured every bite. Then he set up the couch with blankets and pillows. Get some sleep, Tommy. Tomorrow, we're going to make some changes. As the boy finally drifted off, Darius sat in his kitchen chair, planning his next move. He could call Child Protective Services, but he had heard too many stories about kids falling through the cracks, getting sent back to dangerous situations. He needed to be smarter about this. The next morning, Darius woke Tommy gently and made him breakfast. Then he did something that surprised even himself. He called in sick to work and spent the day gathering evidence. First, he took photos of Tommy's injuries with his digital camera, making sure to document everything carefully. Then he drove to Tommy's school and spoke with his teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, who had been worried about the boy's frequent absences and the bruises she had noticed but hadn't known how to address. I've been keeping notes, she admitted, showing Darius a folder filled with observations about Tommy's behavior and appearance over the past few months. I reported it once, but nothing came of it. That afternoon, Darius waited outside Rita Fletcher's workplace. She was a small woman who looked exhausted beyond her 38 years. When her shift ended at the diner, Darius approached her carefully. Mrs. Fletcher? My name is Darius Washington. I need to talk to you about Tommy. The fear that flashed across her face told him everything he needed to know. Deep down, she suspected something was wrong. Over coffee at a nearby restaurant, Darius showed Rita the photos and shared what Tommy had told him. He watched as the color drained from her face, as her hands began to shake. I work so much, she whispered. I thought Vincent was helping. He said Tommy was just clumsy, always getting into accidents. Rita, this isn't your fault. But we need to act now, before it gets worse. Together, they went to the police station. With the photos, the teacher's documentation, and Rita's testimony, they had enough evidence. Vincent Fletcher was arrested that evening on charges of child abuse. But Darius wasn't done. He knew that sometimes the system failed, that abusers found ways to manipulate their way back into children's lives. So he made sure Rita understood the resources available to her, helped her find a support group for mothers in her situation, and even helped her move Tommy's belongings out of the apartment while Vincent was in jail. Rita's mother lived 2 states away and had been begging her daughter to bring Tommy for a visit. Now it became permanent. Tommy would live with his grandmother, attend a new school, and finally have the chance to be a normal kid. The day before they left, Tommy came to see Darius one last time. Why did you help me? The boy asked, his voice stronger now than it had been that night in the parking garage. Darius knelt down to Tommy's level. Because every kid deserves to feel safe. Because someone should have done the same for me when I was your age. And because sometimes, doing the right thing is the only choice that matters. Tommy hugged him then, a fierce embrace that nearly brought tears to Darius's eyes. I'm going to remember you forever, Tommy whispered. You just focus on being a kid, okay? Study hard, make friends, and don't let anyone make you feel small ever again. As Darius watched Rita's car disappear down the street, Tommy's small face pressed against the back window, waving goodbye. He felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Purpose. He had made a real difference in someone's life. What Darius couldn't have known, as he returned to his quiet apartment and prepared for another night shift, was that his act of kindness had set into motion a chain of events that would take 20 years to come full circle. Sometimes the universe keeps score in ways we never expect. And sometimes, when we least expect it, our good deeds find their way back to us. 20 years had passed since that night in the parking garage, and life had not been kind to Darius Washington. The man who once walked with purpose through the Meridian office complex now shuffled through his days, carrying the weight of 2 decades worth of broken dreams and shattered hopes. It started just 3 weeks after Tommy left town. Vincent Fletcher had been released on bail, and his criminal friends wasted no time in seeking revenge against the security guard who had destroyed their buddy's life. They planted stolen electronics in Darius's locker at work, then tipped off his supervisor about the theft. The evidence was damning. Security cameras had been mysteriously turned off during the time the items were supposedly taken. Vincent's friend, Marcus Rivera, who worked maintenance at the building, swore he saw Darius acting suspiciously near the storage room. Another conspirator, Jake Morrison, claimed he witnessed Darius stuffing something into his bag during his shift. Darius pleaded his innocence, but who was going to believe a night security guard over multiple witnesses? The police were called. Though charges were eventually dropped due to lack of concrete evidence, the damage was done. Darius Washington was fired for theft, and his reputation in the security industry was destroyed overnight. "You should have minded your own business," Vincent had whispered to him outside the courthouse, his breath reeking of alcohol and hatred. "Now you know what happens to people who cross me." What followed were 20 years of struggle that would have broken a weaker man. Security companies wouldn't hire him because of the theft allegations. Background checks always raised red flags. Even when potential employers were willing to overlook the incident, somehow word would get back to Vincent's network, and mysterious phone calls would ensure that job offers were quickly rescinded. Darius found himself working a series of dead-end jobs that barely kept him afloat. He cleaned office buildings at night, stocked shelves at grocery stores, delivered newspapers in the early morning hours. Sometimes he worked 3 jobs at once just to make rent on his cramped studio apartment in the same rundown neighborhood where he had saved Tommy all those years ago. The irony wasn't lost on him. While he had given Tommy a chance at a new life, his own life had spiraled into a nightmare of financial instability and social isolation. Friends disappeared when he could no longer afford to go out. The woman he had been dating left when it became clear his situation wasn't temporary. His dreams of maybe starting his own security company, of building something meaningful, crumbled under the weight of his destroyed reputation. By his 50th birthday, Darius had developed a persistent cough from years of working in dusty warehouses and poorly ventilated buildings. His back ached constantly from lifting heavy boxes and scrubbing floors. His hands, once steady and strong, now trembled slightly from exhaustion and stress. The neighborhood around him had deteriorated too. Drug dealers operated openly on street corners. Gunshots were a nightly soundtrack. Break-ins were so common that people stopped reporting them to police who rarely responded anyway. Darius lived behind 3 deadbolts and security bars, the irony of his situation not lost on him. He often wondered about Tommy during those long, sleepless nights. Had the boy grown up happy? Was he in college somewhere, living the life that Darius's sacrifice had made possible? Sometimes Darius would search for him online at the public library, but Tommy Fletcher was a common enough name, and he had no idea what the boy might look like now or what he might be doing. The worst part wasn't the financial struggle or even the physical exhaustion. It was the growing bitterness that threatened to consume him. Late at night, when his body ached and his stomach growled because he had chosen to pay rent instead of buying groceries, Darius would lie awake and wonder if helping Tommy had been worth destroying his own life. He tried to push away those dark thoughts, but they grew stronger with each passing year. He had saved a child and lost everything. Where was the justice in that? Where was the karma that people always talked about? Good things were supposed to happen to good people, but Darius had learned that the universe didn't always keep fair books. By his 54th birthday, Darius was working at Murphy's Electronics Warehouse, a sprawling facility on the outskirts of town where he loaded trucks from midnight to 8 in the morning. The pay was barely above minimum wage, and the work was backbreaking, but it was steady employment, which had become precious to him. His co-workers were mostly young men who could have been his sons, and they treated him with a mixture of pity and confusion. What was a man his age doing loading boxes instead of relaxing in retirement? They didn't understand that retirement was a luxury for people who had been able to build careers and save money. Darius's supervisor, a perpetually angry man named Chuck Hendricks, seemed to take particular pleasure in making his life difficult. Extra shifts when others called in sick. The heaviest loads. The most unreasonable deadlines. It was as if the world had decided that Darius Washington deserved to suffer. "You're getting too old for this work, Washington," Chuck would say with a smirk. "Maybe it's time to think about moving on." But where could he go? At 54, with his employment history and reputation, who would hire him? He was trapped in a cycle of poverty and exhaustion that seemed to have no end. The final blow came on a rainy Tuesday in October. Darius arrived at work to find Chuck waiting for him with a pink slip and a security guard. "Corporate is downsizing," Chuck said, though his satisfied expression suggested this was personal. "Your position has been eliminated." Just like that, After 3 years of reliable service, Darius was escorted out of the building and told not to return. The severance pay was a joke. 2 weeks' salary that wouldn't even cover his rent. Walking home in the rain that night, his few personal belongings in a cardboard box that was slowly disintegrating from the moisture, Darius felt something break inside him. 20 years of struggling, of maintaining hope, of believing that things would eventually get better, and this was where it had led him. He sat in his empty apartment the next morning, staring at the eviction notice that had been slipped under his door. 30 days to pay 3 months back rent or face homelessness. At 54 years old, he was about to lose the last thing he had left. The apartment was barely furnished. A mattress on the floor, a small television he had bought secondhand, a card table and folding chair that served as his kitchen and office. The refrigerator hummed loudly and contained little more than expired milk and a half-empty jar of peanut butter. This was what 20 years of honest work had gotten him. Darius pulled out the shoebox he kept under his bed, the one that contained his important papers. Birth certificate, high school diploma, discharge papers from his brief stint in the army, and at the bottom, a faded Polaroid photograph. It was the only picture he had of Tommy, taken the morning before the boy left town with his mother. In the photo, Tommy was smiling, really smiling, for perhaps the first time in months. His bruises had faded, and his eyes held hope instead of fear. He looked like what he was supposed to be, a normal 8-year-old boy with his whole life ahead of him. Darius stared at that photograph for a long time, remembering the fierce hug Tommy had given him, the whispered promise that he would never forget. Had the boy kept that promise, or had time and distance erased the memory of the security guard who had saved his life? It didn't matter now. Darius had made his choice 20 years ago, and he would make the same choice again if he had to. But sitting in his nearly empty apartment, facing homelessness and complete destitution, he couldn't help but wonder if the universe had forgotten about him entirely. Outside his window, the neighborhood continued its slow decay. Sirens wailed in the distance. Someone was shouting in the alley behind his building. This was his world now, and it seemed like it would be his world until the day he died. Darius Washington, the man who had once been a hero to a terrified child, closed his eyes and tried to remember what hope felt like. In 2 days, he would have to start looking for another job, another apartment, another chance to start over. At 54, with arthritis in his knees and despair in his heart, he wasn't sure he had the strength to begin again. But he would try, because that's what survivors do. They keep going, even when the road ahead looks impossible, even when the world seems determined to crush them. Tomorrow, he would wake up and continue the fight for another day. What Darius didn't know, as he sat in his dark apartment holding that faded photograph, was that across the country, a young man named Thomas Fletcher Morrison was about to make a discovery that would change everything. The universe hadn't forgotten about Darius Washington after all. It had just been taking its time to balance the scales. The black Mercedes S-Class looked completely out of place on Darius's crumbling street. Its pristine paint job and chrome accents gleamed like a jewel against the backdrop of boarded-up windows and graffiti-covered walls. When it pulled up to the curb outside his apartment building, several neighbors peered through their curtains, wondering what kind of trouble was about to unfold. Darius was in his kitchen, dividing his last can of soup into 2 portions to make it last 2 days, when he heard the car door slam. He glanced out his window and saw a tall, well-dressed man in an expensive charcoal suit stepping onto the sidewalk. The stranger moved with confidence, seemingly unbothered by the hostile environment around him. The knock on Darius's door was firm but polite. Through his peephole, Darius could see the man clearly now. He appeared to be in his late 20s, with kind eyes and a face that seemed somehow familiar, though Darius couldn't place it. "Mr. Washington? My name is Thomas Fletcher Morrison. I was wondering if I could speak with you for a few minutes." The name hit Darius like a physical blow. Fletcher. After 20 years, could it really be? With trembling hands, Darius unlocked his 3 deadbolts and opened the door. The man standing before him bore little resemblance to the frightened 8-year-old boy he remembered. But those eyes were unmistakable. "Tommy." Thomas smiled, and suddenly Darius could see the child he had once saved. "Hello, Mr. Washington. I've been looking for you for a very long time." Darius stepped aside, suddenly self-conscious about his sparse apartment. Thomas entered without judgment, his gaze taking in the modest surroundings with what appeared to be understanding rather than pity. "I can't believe it's really you," Darius said, his voice barely above a whisper. Look at you. You're all grown up. Thanks to you, Thomas replied. Everything I am today, everything I've accomplished, started that night in the parking garage when you decided to help a scared kid instead of looking the other way. They sat at Darius's card table, and Thomas began to share his story. After moving in with his grandmother in Oregon, his life had transformed completely. His grandmother, Elena Fletcher, had been a retired teacher who recognized his potential and nurtured it. She got him into therapy to deal with his trauma, enrolled him in advanced classes, and encouraged his natural aptitude for technology. I graduated high school at 16, Thomas explained. Got a full scholarship to MIT. Studied computer science and business. But through it all, I never forgot about you. My grandmother used to say that angels don't always have wings. Sometimes they wear security uniforms and work night shifts. Thomas had built his first app while still in college, a safety application that allowed children to discreetly report abuse to authorities. It became hugely successful, leading to a series of other applications focused on child protection and safety. By age 25, he had sold his company to a major tech corporation for $200 million. But success felt hollow, Thomas continued, because I knew that somewhere, the man who had saved my life might be struggling. I hired private investigators to find you 3 years ago. Darius felt his stomach drop. If investigators had been looking for him, they would have uncovered the theft allegations, the job losses, the decades of struggle. I know what happened, Thomas said gently, as if reading his thoughts. I know about Vincent's revenge, about the false accusations, about how helping me destroyed your life. And I know it's my fault. No, Darius said firmly. Don't you ever think that. What I did because it was right. Vincent and his friends made their own choices. But that doesn't make it fair, Thomas replied. You saved my life and lost yours in the process. For 20 years, you've paid the price for doing the right thing. But that ends today. Thomas reached into his briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. Vincent Fletcher died in prison 2 years ago. Liver failure from years of alcohol abuse. But before he died, he confessed everything to a cellmate. How he and his friends framed you, destroyed your reputation, made sure you couldn't find decent work. The confession is all here, signed and witnessed. Darius stared at the documents, hardly believing what he was seeing. After 20 years, the truth was finally coming to light. But that's not all, Thomas continued. I've spent the last year systematically addressing every injustice you suffered. Marcus Rivera, the maintenance worker who planted evidence in your locker, now works for a company I own. When I bought the company 6 months ago, he confessed everything to keep his job. Jake Morrison, who provided false testimony, has been arrested for insurance fraud, something my investigators uncovered while looking into your case. Thomas pulled out another set of documents. I've had the best lawyers in the country working on your case. We've filed a lawsuit against your former employer for wrongful termination, against the building management company for failing to investigate properly, and against the individuals who conspired to frame you. The settlements alone amount to $4.2 million. Darius felt dizzy. I don't understand. Why would you do all this? Because you didn't just save my life that night, Thomas said, his voice thick with emotion. You showed me what kind of man I wanted to become. You taught me that doing the right thing matters, even when it costs you everything. Every success I've had, every life my apps have saved, every child who's been protected because of the technology one created, it all traces back to you. Thomas reached into his briefcase again and pulled out a check. Darius looked at the number and felt his heart stop. $5 million. This isn't charity, Thomas said quickly. This is justice. This is karma finally catching up. But more than that, I have a proposition for you. Thomas explained that he was launching a new venture, a comprehensive security consulting firm that would specialize in protecting vulnerable populations. Schools, shelters, community centers, places where children and families needed safety the most. I want you to run it, Thomas said. Not just as an employee, but as a full partner. You'll have complete autonomy, unlimited resources, and the chance to do what you've always been meant to do, protect people who can't protect themselves. But I'm 54 years old, Darius protested. I've been out of the security field for 20 years. And in those 20 years, you've learned things that can't be taught in any classroom, Thomas replied. You've experienced struggle, injustice, and hardship. You understand what it means to be powerless. That makes you exactly the right person for this job. Thomas stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the deteriorating neighborhood. This street, this whole area. I've been buying properties here for the past year. Not to gentrify or displace people, but to revitalize. New community center, upgraded housing, job training programs, after-school programs for kids. I want you to oversee security for all of it. Darius felt tears welling up in his eyes. I can't accept this. It's too much. It's not enough, Thomas said firmly. 20 years ago, you gave a scared kid hope when he had none. You showed him that there were still good people in the world worth fighting for. Now it's my turn to give you hope. Thomas handed him another document, the deed to a house 3 blocks away. A real house, not an apartment with a yard and a garage. I bought this last month. It's yours free and clear. Consider it a signing bonus. As if that weren't enough, Thomas revealed one final surprise. Remember Mrs. Rodriguez, your teacher from elementary school? She's retired now, living in Florida. She sent you this. He handed Darius a letter written in the familiar handwriting he remembered from his childhood. Mrs. Rodriguez had kept track of Tommy over the years through his grandmother, and she wanted Darius to know how proud she was of both of them. There's something else, Thomas said, saving the biggest revelation for last. The Meridian office complex where you used to work security. I bought it 6 months ago. Your old supervisor, the one who fired you, submitted his resignation yesterday when he learned who the new owner was. The security company that destroyed your reputation? Also mine now. We'll be implementing new policies to ensure that what happened to you never happens to anyone else. Darius sat in stunned silence, trying to process everything he had heard. 20 years of struggle, of wondering if the universe had forgotten about him, and now this. Why now? He asked. Why did it take so long? Thomas smiled sadly. Because I had to become the man you believed I could be before I was worthy of repaying your kindness. And because sometimes the universe takes its time to set things right. But when it does, it makes sure the accounting is complete. As Thomas prepared to leave, he turned back to Darius one final time. You saved my life when I was 8 years old. But you did more than that. You saved my soul. You showed me that even in the darkest moments, there are people willing to sacrifice everything to help a stranger. That lesson has guided every decision I've made since. After Thomas left, Darius sat alone in his apartment, surrounded by documents that would change his life forever. The eviction notice on his table suddenly seemed laughable. The empty refrigerator, the threadbare furniture, the decades of struggle, all of it would soon be just a memory. But more than the money, more than the house or the job or the vindication, what moved Darius most was the realization that his sacrifice hadn't been in vain. The frightened boy he had saved had grown into a man who was changing the world, protecting other children, making sure that other families didn't have to endure what Tommy had endured. Darius picked up the faded photograph of 8-year-old Tommy and smiled through his tears. The universe had been keeping score after all. It had just been compiling interest for 20 years, waiting for the perfect moment to deliver justice with dividends that exceeded anything Darius could have imagined. Sometimes karma moves slowly, but when it finally arrives, it comes with the force of 2 decades worth of accumulated righteousness. And sometimes, just sometimes, the good guys really do win in the end.